And later tomorrow night is a curry on how to...
Quick, take Beecham's. Quick, take Beecham's. At the first sign of a cold, take Beecham's powders capsules with decongestant.
Feel better, fast.
Just celebrate the taste of delicious Asti Martini at selected licensed co-ops. Asti Martini at selected licensed co-ops.
When you're feeling off color, take Andrews.
Sherlock's Home. A Taste of Tonight from Cadbury's.
Join Vincent Price, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing for 2 hours of terror in the House of the Long Shadows, straight after News at 10.
Civil servants are to be investigated for insider dealings. The government opts to buy the American AWACS, not Nimrod. Drug addicts will get free needles to reduce AIDS. The wife who survived having her throat cut. A doctor is jailed for child porn offences. Good evening. A major inquiry has been launched into allegations that civil servants may be using inside knowledge to make big profits from share deals. Senior inspectors moved in today to investigate claims that government staff may be involved in insider dealing. The team will investigate 3 organizations: the Department of Trade, the Monopolies Commission, and the Office for Fair Trading. It's the latest in a series of scandals that have affected the city.
The Department of Trade's determined efforts to root out insider dealing have sent shockwaves through the city. But that the inspectors will now turn up on the department's own doorstep shows how widespread abuses of privileged information could be. Here at the Monopolies and Merger Commission, civil servants have access to highly sensitive information about companies involved in takeovers and mergers. The sort of thing the inspectors will examine is this. Say a major American company with energy interests decides to take over a British company heavily involved in the same business. At that stage, shares in the British company are trading at £1 each. The Department of Trade and Industry can decide to refer that bid to the Monopolies Commission to see whether the resulting company would be so powerful it could undermine proper competition. Any civil servant who knows for certain that the Monopolies Commission and the Trade Secretary will give the go-ahead to the takeover could buy shares in the British company at £1 each. Once the announcement's out, the shares are bound to climb, say to £1.50, giving them an instant 50% profit. That's insider dealing, and it's illegal. The inquiry into the affairs of Guinness in this country and the revelations about self-confessed insider dealer Ivan Boesky in the United States have renewed the political debate about whether the city can effectively police itself.
Clearly, we do need a public agency which would be independent both of the city and of government, would be charged with making sure that the law was observed in the money markets and by the people in the government who control the money markets.
What it illustrates is the government's determination, wherever it has reason to believe that there may be insider trading, it's using the powers available to it and taking quick and ready action.
There's wry amusement in the city that the Department of Trade is now in the limelight, but it's also bracing itself for further revelations. Mark Webster, News at 10, the city.
The Nimrod project is cancelled after 10 years and £1 billion spent on the GEC plan to provide a British-built early warning radar plane for the Royal Air Force. The Defence Secretary, Mr. Younger, told MPs Nimrod was found wanting. He also said the government made mistakes over the project and there'll be an internal Ministry of Defence inquiry to ensure better monitoring of big contracts in future. Britain's early warning plane will now come from America. 6 Boeing AWACS will start arriving in 1991. Labour says it's a sad, bad decision that will cost jobs. The Alliance says the story shows serious deficiencies inside the Ministry of Defence, but the government had no option.
Given the fact that this was the biggest defence contract in years and that nearly £1 billion worth of taxpayers' money has been lost as a result of it all, the House has not been getting very excited. Conservative MPs did cheer on Mr. Younger in the debate tonight, but Labour attacks on the government's decision didn't really strike home. Judging by the relaxed mood afterwards, the government's decision in Cabinet this morning wasn't a particularly difficult one after the pretty devastating dossier on Nimrod built up in the Ministry of Defence. Mrs. Thatcher, of course, had prepared the ground by telling the House on Tuesday that the country's defence needs would come first, but that still didn't stop the Shadow Defence Secretary attacking the government's decision today.
The Secretary of State's decision is not only sad, it is a bad decision. It is a bad decision for Britain's defence interests, because ultimately a country can only defend itself on the basis of the strength of its industrial and technological base.
Mr. Younger's handling of the announcement effectively silenced the Tory backers of Nimrod, but the opposition touched a raw nerve when they taunted Mr. Younger with his suggestion earlier this month that Nimrod worked as well as AWACS.
Of course it does, on occasions, reach some parts of the criterion at some times. But could I suggest that if one is up in an airborne early warning aircraft in a time of war, liable to be shot at by an enemy, one does require the equipment to work all the time and not just occasionally.
For GEC's chairman, Mr. Pryor, it's been a fairly awful day, with Mr. Younger's remarks only coming as salt in the wound. Didn't he accept, though, that in the end, it all had to rest with Mr. Younger's judgment about Nimrod?
Well, that's his judgment, and at the end of the day, that is the decision the government has reached, and I have to accept that decision. I'm bitterly and deeply disappointed by the decision that's been reached, and I happen to believe it's the wrong decision.
The main decision over, MPs aren't going to let the matter rest entirely. There's the question of all that wasted public money under a succession of defence secretaries.
The opposition, I think, have got a difficulty because they entered into the contract, and the contract is the problem, because it's a contract with outbreak clauses, cost-plus contract, no effective monitoring, no discipline built into it. And so we were really caught.
Well, two replies to that. First, it was done in 1977, and the government has had 7 years in that time to rectify it. Secondly, when the proposal was made, there was no voice raised in objection in the House at all.
£900 million of taxpayers' money has been involved in it, and I think we're entitled to know what has happened since 1977 and why did we end up with something that is literally money down the drain.
The Ministry of Defence has already admitted that this whole episode over Nimrod is one of the worst examples of contract mismanagement, and the powerful Commons Public Accounts Committee has already started an in-depth investigation into what went on. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
It'll be over 4 years before these Boeing AWACS radar planes are decked out in RAF markings, though the Defence Ministry might consider leasing US Air Force planes before then. 6 of them will cost the British taxpayers £860 million. Another 2 may be ordered later. Continuing the contract to complete the 11 Nimrods would have cost just £200 million less, according to the Defence Secretary, with no guarantee they could be finished satisfactorily. Mr. Younger says Nimrod's radar lacks range. It picks up false targets over the sea. It can't track targets for long enough and has too little computer power. GEC accept these problems exist, but say they can cure them. They promise to pay a penalty of £200 million if they didn't manage to. The company's risk, though, was just a financial one.
The risk that they couldn't take, though, is the risk that faces me. The risk of finding in 3 years' time that it didn't work for whatever reason, and that the RAF faced a blank period of X years thereafter with no airborne early warning and a threat to deal with. Now, that's my risk, and that's the risk that I feel is more than I can ask the RAF or the defence of this country to accept.
For the past 15 years, the RAF has been using these old Shackleton planes for airborne early warning. Its technology is 1950s and not up to detecting the present generation of low-flying fighters and cruise missiles. In 1977, the Shackleton's replacement program began. The RAF had 12 spare Nimrods. Developing a radar for them was seen as cheaper and quicker than joining other NATO countries in buying the American AWACS. 1982, Nimrod should have been ready. NATO received its first AWACS then, but Nimrod's radar was late. It was 1984 when the first Nimrod was delivered, but its radar was unsatisfactory. In February 1985, however, the RAF said the system would work. But by the end of last year, things looked bleaker. In March this year, GEC were given a final 6 months. Today, it was cancelled after almost 10 years and nearly £1 billion. GEC have said such a decision would cause 2,500 staff to lose their jobs. At the factories concerned in Hertfordshire, GEC employees were bitter.
I didn't think Maggie could do it. I really didn't.
There's so much despondency, it's terrible. Well, I'm absolutely appalled by it. I'm ashamed to be British sometimes.
And what about the 11 Nimrod aircraft converted to the radar role? The RAF won't want to scrap them completely. 37 other Nimrods are used for submarine tracking and electronic eavesdropping. The RAF will now be looking for ways to use their 11 spare aircraft.
Rolls-Royce aero engines is to be sold off in April or May next year, but the Industry Secretary, Mr. Channon, says the government will keep a special share in the firm to make sure it stays under British control. The privatisation could raise more than £1,000 million.
The government is to give drug addicts free needles to reduce the risk of catching AIDS from shared needles. The Health Secretary, Mr. Fowler, is setting up 12 pilot schemes around the country. Although the areas haven't been chosen yet, the authorities in Liverpool have been operating a similar scheme for 2 months.
It's units like this which could soon be commonplace all over Britain. Advice centres for drug users giving confidential counselling regardless for those who inject.
Have you got any used works? I'll put some there. Would you want to put them in the
Used needles are exchanged for new ones. Liverpool was the only health authority in the country to introduce the service 2 months ago. Originally, the government didn't want to offer free needles for fear of appearing to condone drug abuse. But today, that was set aside.
Shared needles is one of the most deadly ways in which the AIDS virus has spread. It is one of the ways in which it goes into the general population, and we are having devastating results at the moment, with, of course, babies being born with AIDS. So the whole purpose is to get counselling, advice, guidance to people who are misusing drugs.
In Edinburgh, where over half of the city's drug users are carriers of the AIDS virus, medical officials have been campaigning for free needles for the past year. They say the government's action is tragically late, and Liverpool is also critical.
I can understand people's anxiety about it, but when you consider how dangerous AIDS is, I think it's quite scandalous that it's taken this long to actually start these schemes. It's taken this long for this government to do anything about it.
The first new services will start in the new year, but counsellors fear it could take months, if not years, to win the confidence of unregistered addicts reluctant to go to a drug centre. Andrew Simmons, News at 10, Liverpool.
The Russians say they'll end their ban on nuclear tests in the new year if the Americans continue testing. The Russians claim there have been 24 underground tests in the United States since they imposed their own ban 16 months ago. They say the first American test next year will signal the end of their moratorium.
Serious rioting has broken out in a regional capital of the Soviet Union, and the authorities have taken the unusual step of reporting it on television. Residents of Alma-Ata, the capital of Kazakhstan, rioted after their local party leader was ousted by Moscow and replaced by a Russian. Dinmuhamed Kuniev had held his post for 22 years. He was a close associate of former Soviet leader Mr. Brezhnev. On tonight's evening news, Soviet television didn't mention Kuniev's dismissal. The newsreader just gave an account of the violence.
В сложившейся ситуации воспользовались хулиганствующие, паразитические и другие антиобщественные лица, допустив противоправные действия в отношении представителей правопорядка, а также учинив поджоги продовольственного магазина, личных автомобилей, оскорбительные действия против граждан города. Прошедшие собрания на заводе.
Here, a top children's doctor from a South London hospital has been jailed for a year for running a child pornography ring. He'd been taking indecent photographs of children, as well as buying and selling them. When police raided his hospital office, they found thousands of photographs and hundreds of sex magazines in his filing cabinets.
In passing sentence, the judge, Mr. Justice McCowan, told Professor Brooke, "You pose a grave danger to children. Society must be protected from people who peddle this dangerous filth." Professor Brooke, who's 45 and the father of 4 children, was the former head of pediatric medicine at a major London hospital. His colleagues describe him as the top man in his field in Britain. When police raided his office in the hospital, they found a hoard of pornography in the bottom of a filing cabinet, which contained the medical records of children under his care. It exists, and his own personal collection of child pornography, which contained more than 100 explicit photographs. He advertised his material in girly magazines, allowed his perverted sexual interest to interfere with his work as a paediatrician. His career was now in ruins.
I am absolutely delighted that our #1 priority has been achieved in attacking child pornography. But that is also tinged with a degree of sadness, as you say, that society as a whole has perhaps lost an asset of the man's expertise.
In sentencing him to 12 months, the judge said he accepted Professor Brooke was selling child pornography to fund his addiction and not for greed. David Chater, News at 10 at Kingston Crown Court.
A doctor has been jailed for life for murdering his first wife and trying to kill his second. She survived having her throat cut to tell the tale, a report in Part 2. Also, the winter looks like halting the search for more victims of the Moors murders, and an award for the brave girl who protected her brother from the terrorists. That's in a couple of minutes.
After dark, Tia Maria tea.
Choose a gas heater, and you can say goodbye to the cold spots in your home. A gas heater. Fit one wherever you need it, and you'll find fast, controllable heat always available, and economical to run. Isn't it time you warmed the cold spots in your home with a gas heater? Gas. No wonder people prefer it.
Some dogs really are special. And dogs this special deserve Mr. Dog. Because Mr. Dog is specially prepared with 100% meat in delicious jelly. And he'll love you for it. Mr. Dog, specially prepared because some dogs are special.
There's a sensational range of gifts at Curry's now. A massive choice at unbeatable prices.
Personal stereo at Curry's starts at an incredible $9.99.
A Philips main shaver at a gift of a price, just $19.99.
An exclusive Braun food processor deal with citrus juicer and free blender.
And the new Sinclair Spectrum Plus 2 with free joystick and software. Curry's, no one beats our prices, guaranteed.
Give him Old Spice for Christmas. The classic masculine fragrance. The mark of a man.
Hi, fellas! Hey! Barbican sounds pretty tropical, eh?
Barbican for Neville, please.
Oh, Barbican! Bottled lager, eh?
There you go, Neville.
Huh! Hey, that bites! Christ, look out throat, eh? It's wicked.
Well, we're having another one, Neville.
Oh, no. Thanks, crumbs. I'm driving.
Barbican alcohol-free lager. It keeps you cool.
A family doctor has been jailed for life for murdering his first wife with an injection of morphine, then trying to kill his second wife by slitting her throat. Dr. John Baksh, killed to marry his second wife, then wanted her dead to claim £250,000 in life insurance. The judge said he should serve at least 20 years and said he was demonstrably a danger to those close to him.
Madhu Baksh says it's a miracle she survived the throat wound inflicted by her husband. They married in 1984, and within 2 years, the seemingly loving John Baksh was plotting her death. 3 days before their second anniversary, he drugged her with morphine at their home in Bromley, took her to a local beauty spot, slit her throat and left her to die. She was found by a naturalist checking a toad colony at midnight. That and the freezing cold, which slowed down bleeding, saved her life. As Madhu recovered, still unable to speak, John Baksh tried to persuade her to cover up for him.
He says, "Who was it?" "You." That was. Couldn't speak. Fingered like that. And straight away he broke up sort of thing. And he was looking straight in my eyes, and I was looking straight in his eyes. And he started to say, "Don't say that, Madhu. Don't say that." He was speaking in Hindi now. "If you say that, I'll go to jail. You have to save my life. Save my life. Please, Madhu, save my life."
But she told police the truth and John Back's secret. He'd poisoned his first wife, Ruby, in Spain so he'd be free to marry Madhu.
When he told me about that, I was frightened to death. And it was a very big decision to make whether I go ahead with the marriage or not. Once I made the decision, after that, never I suspected him. I thought he was so sorry, so ashamed, so repentful, which he was. He said he has asked forgiveness from God, which he has been given, that's why he's not being caught. All that he wants forgiveness from me, whom he loves. I forgave him.
If the first murder was for love, the attempted second was for money, to claim a huge insurance policy on Madhu's life.
I knew the premium was very high. I came to know about it because once I was reading the statement of the bank, and I saw just to the Hambro Life we were paying £1,000 per month of premium. So I asked John, can we afford it? It's too much, isn't it? Do we need it? Can we afford it? He said, it's very important. We must have it. I said, okay.
And what about your life now? What do you do from now on?
I think I'm going to be very, very sad for the rest of my life. I can smile in spite of it. I do not know how. But internally, I'm broken down to pieces, absolute pieces.
Snowstorms forced police to call off their search for 2 victims of the Moors' murderers today, and they think they may now have to give up for the winter.
The Pennine winter closed in late this afternoon, the road at the centre of the snowplows. For the police and their sniffer dogs searching for 20-year-old graves, a difficult task, now almost impossible. The decision to reopen the investigation in winter has been fiercely criticised by MPs, criticism angrily rejected by the man in charge.
Are we now going to be, as police officers, troubled about whether I should take on an inquiry because of what a politician's going to say about it? I don't ever want that to be. Should it ever be, I really want to be in the police force, quite frankly.
But a few hours later, Chief Superintendent Topping's sniffer dogs were forced to give up, unable to detect a scent in the snow. The weather will now decide when the search, boosted by Myra Hindley's return to the moors 48 hours ago, will be resumed. This is the weather the police were hoping would stay away until they had a chance to evaluate Myra Hindley's information. Now they know it could be next spring before they have a chance to follow up their new leads. Paul Davis, News at 10, Saddleworth Moor.
Unemployment's fallen for the 4th month running. In November, 3,216,767 people claim benefit. That's down more than 20,000. The seasonally adjusted total and best guide to the underlying trend also fell to just under 3,146,000. Vacancies rose for the 10th month running and stand at over 215,000. In Scotland, 800 new jobs have been created by a special community venture. This report from Michael Green.
Until 3 years ago, this was a community dying on its feet. With no more jobs in the mines, many brighter children left the area. Others joined the street corner culture of the unemployed. Oil rigs sheltering in the Forth because of North Sea cutbacks add to the sense of decline. Unusually, church leaders provided the spur for change. The Reverend Dane Sherrard got together a management team which was virtually to halve the 40% male unemployment rate. The start was modest. Converting a church needed money, for which in the end they turned to the Manpower Services Commission. The MSC in turn asked the church to find training places with nearby firms for 50 youngsters, which it did so quickly that the MSC pushed for more.
The Manpower Services Commission came back to us and said, now is the time, we'd like to help you do something to create your centre. We'll give you a 116-place community programme, provided you fill all the places within a week. So it was down to the job centre, recruiting all of the people that we could find, and started work. Having started work, everything just blossomed.
The agency the church set up now employs more than 800 on some very ambitious projects. Converting a church into a theatre is an asset, though for the young to gain experience alongside craftsmen is prized more highly. More ambitious still, restoring the harbour, once a busy fishing port, now silted up with the spoil from the mines. Rebuilt, it should help the town attract tourists.
The agency's own transport ferries the old and disabled to enjoy the comfort of a restored building nicknamed Hypothermia Hall, in buildings bought for commercial concerns. Upholsterer James Boyd knows the social benefit. An ex-prisoner jailed for assault, he couldn't communicate at first, now he's teaching others. Critics will argue that all this is no compensation for the decline in traditional manufacturing, but that 800 have found real jobs through this project is undoubtedly impressive. It's a transformation which, say the job creation experts, should give hope and inspiration to other areas of high unemployment. Michael Green, News at 10, Buckhaven.
Mr. Eugene Hasenfuss, the American who was shot down flying guns to the Contra rebels in Nicaragua and who was freed yesterday, flew back to the United States tonight. He's expected to be questioned by Congress about the Iran arms deal.
Eugene Hasenfuss will become the latest player in the drama over the Iran arms affair. He's expected to tell congressional investigators what he knows about arms shipments to the Nicaraguan Contras. He's already said he believed the private supply mission he was involved in had official backing.
I was coming right out of the White House.
Hasenfuss was freed after Democrat Senator Christopher Dodd met Nicaraguan leader Daniel Ortega, causing angry debate in Washington about Hasenfuss being used for propaganda purposes.
Mr. Dodd knows that Mr. Hasenfuss has loose lips. He's going to come up here and be paraded before all these congressional hearings, and he's going to be used as one more stick to bash Ronald Reagan over the head on his Nicaragua policy.
And if it's suggested that it's Reagan bashing for him to come up and tell the truth about the exercises in which he was engaged, then I would say truth is Reagan bashing.
Hasenfuss himself wasn't commenting when he arrived in Miami a short while ago.
Thank God that I was able to be freed and come home to spend with my family. And I'm looking for a little private time with them, and so another time when I'll be able to speak to you all again at a different time.
Meanwhile, Colonel Oliver North today defended his decision not to testify.
I don't believe the president really wants me to abandon my individual rights under the Constitution. People have died face down in the mud all over the world defending those individual rights. That's the thing that makes this country so much different than any other country in the world.
The CIA chief, William Casey, has just had a 5-hour operation in Washington to remove a malignant brain tumor. Mr. Casey, who's 73, is one of the officials who's being questioned about the Iranian and Nicaraguan arms deals. Tonight he's said to be doing well.
The organs for the world's first heart, lung and liver transplant at Papworth came from a 14-year-old Northamptonshire girl who died after a road crash, it was revealed tonight. The recipient, Mrs. Davina Thompson, is still unconscious, but in a satisfactory condition. Earlier today, her husband, Peter, described how he kept the truth of her illness from her for 6 months because no one believed a triple transplant was possible.
I was told never to tell Davina about the condition because they never thought they'd be able to do it. And then 18 months ago, we were late talking, like in bed, and she says, "You've got something to tell me, like, have you?" I had to tell her that. She says, "You're bloody wrong, leaving this information away from me." And she says, "You must never, ever do this again."
Tonight's main news again, there's to be an inquiry into alleged insider share dealings by civil servants. And some late news, Brent Council in London tonight accepted the Education Secretary's directive to halt all disciplinary action against Miss Maureen McGoldrick, the headmistress who was accused of racism.
Finally, an 8-year-old girl who shielded her younger brother during a terrorist attack in Cyprus received a special bravery award from the Duchess of Kent today. Rebecca Malpass is one of 15 youngsters who are this year's Children of Courage.
Britain's bravest youngsters got together at Westminster Abbey to receive their awards. They've all shown personal endurance or great bravery. Christopher Izzet was born with no hip joints, ankles in the wrong place, and hands facing backwards. Despite this, he is learning to walk and is as cheeky as any 2-year-old. Rebecca Malpass, who's 8, showed great bravery protecting her little brother Adam when terrorists in Cyprus attacked the car they were riding in. She shielded him on the back seat. Were you very frightened?
No.
Brave?
Yeah.
The children were given their awards by the Duchess of Kent, and one little girl gave the Duchess a special thank you. The children then met their TV favourites. The 2 Ronnies became a threesome, and Christopher starred in 3 of a kind. But today, all 15 children were stars in their own right. Michael Jermy, News at 10, Westminster Abbey.
And that's the news from us tonight. Good night.
Good evening. Now the late news for the Central Region. Birmingham has been earmarked as one of 12 cities where free needles will be given out to drug users. It's the latest government offensive in the fight against AIDS. Peter Brooks reports.
The government plan has been welcomed by the drugs community in Birmingham. Doctors and addicts are agreed it's a step in the right direction. Although the Department of Health hasn't named the drug units which will hand out the free needles, this one at the All Saints Hospital in Winston Green will almost certainly be on the list. 2,500 addicts from all over the Midlands come here every year to break their habit.
I think the government's in a very difficult situation, and I think to say that we shouldn't give needles would be hiding one's head in the sand.
What is the general view of AIDS at the moment from the drug community?
They are worried about the disease, but in fact don't want to know.
There's a slight improvement in the condition of the latest sufferer of meningitis in Gloucester. Stephen Brodie, whose too is in intensive care. He lives in Stonehouse, where the 5th victim of the epidemic during this year died on Tuesday. A 24-year-old pottery worker has been charged with the murder of a young mother in Stoke-on-Trent. Philip Alcock from Harrisey Head, near Stoke, has been remanded in custody. The body of 20-year-old Jean Davis was found on Tuesday at her home. She'd been stabbed. Well, no 5-year-old Cross, who barks as she runs up the right tree.
Well, I don't know. It was 30 or 40 feet, maybe. I never fallen out? When she walked up. Honestly, you'll see for yourself in a minute.
Here she goes. What a runner. She hits the tree. She's going up. She's into it. You've never seen these pictures, looking quite amazed.
A quick look at the weather now tonight. Cold, windy, with perhaps ground frost at around 5.